Is Rogue One the finale? Is A New Hope the finale? Is Return of the Jedi the finale to this story? Like, it's the beautiful thing, I think, of the saga being a saga, not series of trilogies that we interact with. It's interesting, like, whether or not the definition of finale is changing for this. Welcome everyone to Krypton to Alderaan. I'm Joey, your Star Wars lover, and with me is Ruish Goodlooks, your Star Wars song guy.
Hello, Joey. Hello, podcast.
Hello.
Hello.
And we are the video podcast that analyzes nerdy pop culture, but it's mostly Star Wars. And this episode, we will be discussing the sadly final arc of Andor. Who else knows? And Jedha, Kyber, Erso. I really think Make It Stop should have been called Move, but what do I know? I don't make up the titles for the episodes. But first, hey, if you're new here and you haven't hit the subscribe button, go ahead and do that. We're fun. We like talking about Star Wars and maybe sometimes other stuff too. You could come back and check us out. We're going to be doing some follow-up episodes to Andor and discussing Rogue One and how Andor has changed Rogue One for us, if it has at all. So hit that subscribe button so you're notified when we do and talk about other stuff. Enough about that, though. Let's just get right in. We have to, it's another one where I'm a little bit hesitant to get into the conversation because I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this arc. Royce, do you have thoughts and feelings?
Sending thoughts and feelings to everybody else watching Andor this season. So I have two thoughts, and I guess...
And one feeling.
I suppose the thoughts could also be feelings. I am satisfied and surprised. It ties everything up. It fades into Rogue One, like, perfectly. I found it very difficult to not immediately want to watch Rogue One after the finale. But what I'm surprised by, it was a lot slower than I would have expected for a season finale. I'm the stereotypical, like, yeah, let's crescendo, let's blow everything up, and we'll go out with a bang. And it's not that kind of season finale, because Rogue One is, like, really the season finale, right? So it had this kind of odd pacing of, like, again, another thing I didn't expect, a surprise, a flashback episode.
To be fair, the flashback doesn't start until, I wrote this down, the flashback does not start until 19 minutes into the episode.
Okay,
so
interesting.
We're a good bit into the episode, and it's when Kleya kind of becomes the main character.
Wow.
And it was great to, I don't want to steamroll your thoughts and feelings here, but I just wanted to point out that the flashback doesn't actually start until like 20 minutes in.
Oh, it's still a flashback episode, but that's interesting, that stat that it's like very far into the episode, but I wasn't expecting that. And I was like, really? So we're going to do a whole episode on just Luthen and Kleya and Luthen's backstory, and this is clearly important to the Andor world, but just unexpected, I guess. Thinking that it's a finale, like, oh, we got to build, but we're not really, we're building to just the beginning of Rogue One. It's this interesting way to pace it. And then, of course, we have the infiltrating the hospital and escaping from the hospital, escaping from the safe house, which was more heart-pounding action that we've come to expect from Andor. And that was really fun. I love the scene with Melshi where they're like, no sudden movements. Yay. Yeah, perfect, right? Bye. That was, I don't know if that was comic relief or not, but I love that. That was a brilliant moment. But the action was packed into the middle of this, though. That was almost kind of like last week with the Gorman massacre, and then like Mon Mothma's escape was not super action-packed, but that was kind of fun at the end. So I felt that this was sort of like an action sandwich with like character building, world building on either end. Once we get to Yavin in the last episode, we spend another 30 minutes, like, I don't know if you'd call it the epilogue, but I think of that last 30 minutes of the last episode as like, it's all epilogue. It's all how we now round this out, all the characters, and tie it into Rogue One. That wasn't a crescendo for me. I was also surprised that Andor walking through Yavin with like the slow-mo, the hero shot, like that was in all the trailers. So another really like surprising moment of like, they showed us this. How often do we see the last scene of the finale in the trailer? Not that that was a super spoilery thing because we know they're on Yavin, but just another interesting way that like this season has shaped up that's very different from other Star Wars that we've got. I'm the format guy, so those things often stick out to me. But yeah, very unique season that I think even stands apart from season 1, as well as the rest of Star Wars. I'm satisfied with it. I guess I'm going to leave it there. Like you said, I'm going to steamroll. I'll let you steamroll now. What are your thoughts and feelings?
I think satisfied is a really good way to put it. I loved these 3 episodes. I loved the flashback episode. This whole arc kind of felt like an epilogue to me. I think I don't want to like put stuff in a box and go down a format rabbit hole. 7, 8, and 9 really, like, the energy was palpable, as the word Krennic uses. And this felt like, okay, we're leading into Rogue One. It's interesting that you're saying like Rogue One is the finale. Is Rogue One the finale? Is A New Hope the finale?
Yeah.
Is Return of the Jedi the finale to this story? Like, it's the beautiful thing, I think, of the saga being a saga, not like series of trilogies that we interact with. It's interesting, like, whether or not the definition of finale is changing for this. And it just goes against what we're used to, right? Like, a season finale is a season finale. We all know what that means. This might not have been that, but I loved it.
Well, the story's not over. That's all.
Yeah,
it doesn't just end here.
Right, exactly. And even when the characters end in this story, the story still goes on. And we'll get to that at the end. But as I was watching like the Kleya Luthen flashback moments, I was like, probably there are going to be people who are not appreciative of this happening this late. I really, really loved it. I loved that they built the connection to these characters at this point. When we've seen them, they have been the go-getter, do anything for the rebellion, and they saved it to the last minute to tell us why, to let us know why. And I thought that was really great, and I loved watching it. And I loved Kleya. It really like bonded me much more with the character. In that moment, she becomes the main character. It's not necessarily a flashback to show us. It's her revisiting that as she's going to kill her father figure, right? She's reliving it. This is a traumatic experience. She's been through a lot of traumatic experience. These memories are coming back up in her life at that exact moment. And that's why we get it at that exact moment. So I really, really dug that. I was very satisfied by the culmination of everything. Maybe not always happy with stuff that happened in these 3 episodes. I have a couple of gripes, I think. It's interesting because we've talked a lot about how the Andor show has not necessarily always been about Cassian Andor. I'm not even sure if 50% of the time it was about Cassian Andor. But it was definitely about the people who built the rebellion. And Luthen and Kleya feature pretty heavily in the series overall, but in these 3 episodes. I mean, it just brought me fully on board with the other characters saying, without Luthen, none of this would exist.
Yeah. I'll push back on your renaming the episode, though. I think we could do a whole 40 minutes of renaming Star Wars episodes easily. But I do love that move line on a rewatch. He says that at the very beginning of the episode, which I think is like, that's one of those
That's
perfect,
what I mean.
Yeah, like, oh, nice. You would have never known that until, you get through it. But yeah, make it stop, dude, because this guy's been fighting forever. And Andor's been fighting forever, and the rebels are fighting forever, and some of them want to give up because they've been fighting so long. And I appreciate that his kind of like beginning of his journey, he's saying make it stop, and then he finally gets relief at the end. So you could have titled it either one, but the episode was maybe more for Luthen in that sense of like, now his job is done, right? And now it's moved on to the other people to pick up the mantle from him. And yeah, that's Yavin. But that line of none of this would exist without Luthen. Willman says that, and Andor says that. I don't know if somebody else says that, but that's a theme that keeps coming up. You sold it to me before we got on air talking today, so maybe you can expound on that. But like, I don't see his connection to Yavin other than like getting Mon Mothma there through Andor, which they bring up, and Bale's like, oh yeah, okay, duly noted. But had we had 2 or 3 other seasons, I can only imagine how much more filled out the somehow would be there.
My interpretation of all of that was that there would be no rebellion without Luthen. Not necessarily specifically Yavin, but that the rebellion would not be what it is. Almost on every aspect, whether it was Luthen building the rebellion or whether it was the rebels on Yavin making it what it is in defense of Luthen being kind of a thorn in their side. Either way, the rebellion would not exist, regardless of Yavin. And I kind of would like to think that if we did get more seasons of the show, we would see that he was even more disconnected from Yavin than we think he was now. Like, never stepped foot there, built it, maybe was okay with it being built as a sanctuary, a safe space to build the rebellion from, but that was not his part to play. And I think that that's the most... We saw so much of that throughout the series, but it is expressly discussed in Make It Stop. And I think that was just so powerful, because like I said, we've picked up on it, but they really go into it in that episode. And the reason that maybe more than the reason, the teachings of him to Kleya, that they are not the ones, or he is not the one that gets to make the good choices. He puts that explosive trigger in front of her to make sure she's ready. But he does it because he knows he's the one who has to do it. He knows that is his role. He has made his mind a sunless place. He fights for a sunrise that he'll never see. And that all started when they started to run and started to build this. And he's the one who pulls the trigger. He's the one who pulls the trigger on Naboo. He's the one who pulls the trigger on Lonnie. Lonnie, who knew that character would be so important for the rebellion? But Luthen is the one. When we see the senators kind of dragging him through the mud, or how does Cassian put it?
You're running him down.
Running him down. The rest of us are, or at least I felt the fire inside me of being like, you can't, what have you all done? Again, like Cassian says, besides Mon Mothma, what have you all done? We got a comment last week when we asked who's the hero, we got a comment that Luthen's the hero. What I love is that different people out in the world, I think, are pointing, like in the real world, are pointing to different characters in this show of being the hero.
Well, there's not one. Dude, you hit on it last week, though. There's multiple chosen ones, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's exactly how we said it on the show last week, or if that's just sort of like the headline that came out of it. I love that, though. That's it, right?
Yeah, and they all have different roles to play. And Luthen's role, although he was not always my favorite character, he was not always the good guy. He did some good stuff, but he was definitely the smartest. And because of that, because the entire espionage aspect of the show, which is the way this show was pitched, it's the way the show ran, the entire like spy espionage package was because of Luthen. I don't know if we talked about it last week, but I just want to throw this out real quick because I said he's the smartest, which objectively I think that he is. But I think it was very nuanced that he was the reason that Bail Organa's team to rescue Mon Mothma was compromised. Like, I think that was pretty nuanced in the show. I don't know if you picked up on it. I don't know if we talked about it last week, but he delivers the message to Cassian that Bail's team is compromised, but Luthen was the one that compromised that team. They say Supervisor Young has an agent in that team, and Supervisor Young is an Imperial, and the agent is an Imperial, and that's the compromise in Bail's team. But Young is Lonnie working for Luthen. Like, just the levels. He needed to make sure that Mothma went with Andor because he needed to be in control of the team. And he knew that Andor could get it done. And just that's so smart. We talked a couple episodes ago about how the Empire is very smart and very good at this. Luthen was the one to give them a run for their money, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. You frame him as the pulling the strings a little bit, and he's setting things in motion, but not exactly like he took the X-Wings and like U-hauled them over to Yavin, you know? Right. That's, for some reason, that's how I was receiving it, watching it in real time, as I was like, we didn't see Luthen like setting Yavin up, and they're saying, well, this is all because of Luthen, but the way that you describe it on the kind of exterior, you know, well, he put other things into motion leading to this, and that's a little esoteric, and that's why all the senators have their nose stuck up at them, because they're not actually seeing the situation clearly. And so this is why I love doing the show, because the podcast here, because you make me aware of these things that, like you said, the nuance is you can read it multiple ways, or you can just kind of miss what they were intending. Or if that's the point, that it is supposed to be kind of like, did Luthen set it up or not? You know, like everyone is playing their own role, and everyone can argue on the show, the characters in the show. Bail, we'll get to Bail. He thinks he's, the savior for some reason.
That whole thing was a gripe that I have. I think if we're gonna have gripes with the show, not something that I appreciated very much, not something that I connected with, and mostly because of the way the senators react. Sometimes the politicians being the same, no matter what side they're on, feels very real world to me and also very icky. But that these senators are sitting there bad-mouthing Luthen when also they haven't watched the show. They haven't seen what we've seen. So we know what actually happened. But the complete disconnect of like Bail a little bit, but the other senators in the room being disconnected from like the everyday people that they are representing here on this base is just like mind-boggling. Like that they're part of a rebellion and they're fighting a fascist regime, and you can't take a step back to look at the whole picture, what this guy is telling you. They say that he's not objective because he spent too much time with Luthen. Cassian makes this point that it's definitely the other way around. They have spent no time with Luthen. He has spent time with Luthen. So he's the best one to make this call. He's maybe not always objective, but has the most data points, has the most information to be able to make the most informed decision. Certainly they were written that way on purpose. That's not necessarily my gripe, but it is something that infuriates me about the characters.
Yeah. Well, they write it the next day. Like they write the wrong the next day. Bale goes to his house and he's like...
One of them does.
Yeah. Well, I think Bale is kind of representing everybody in that instance. Like, okay, go on the mission. Yeah, there's no better word than just frustrating, because you're like, just buy into him. He's your person on the ground. He's got the intel. It takes him one evening to come to their senses and say, okay, go on the mission, and that's going to be the mission on Rogue One. But then they do that scene again in Rogue One. There's more of that infighting. To me, as just a fan of the show and of the characters, I was a little bit disappointed because I had built up in my headcanon that Bail Organa was like a beacon of light character sort of thing. So it was a little annoying to be like how much he was just stomping on him, running him down, I was hoping he would be kind of the like on his side, like, no, let's give him a chance. Let's hear him out. Because there was plenty of other people to disagree. But they wanted to have that flip of now he can come the next day and say, I actually do want to go down swinging. Oh, well, you would have gotten along with Luthen. You don't know it.
Pretty disappointed in Bail Organa myself. Like you're saying, there were enough like contrarians in the room. Maybe upon rewatch or something, making different connections, I'll feel differently about this. But pretty confusing that he was also one pushing back against this. Also, pretty confusing to me that he's the leader of the group in the first place.
No, they don't know who the leader is. Mon steps up and she's like, I grant permission. Like, who... They're all obviously kind of vying for that a little bit.
That's really funny because they talk about like Dedra going against the rules and stuff and pushing boundaries, and they're having this meeting without having a quorum, which is against the rules. But yeah, Mon steps up, but I also thought that Mon would be, I mean, I guess they're like making a democracy or whatever. So there's not one leader, but they really do go to Bail as if he's the head in charge here, and I really wanted that to be Mon Mothma, and it just didn't feel like that to me. So that's just a gripe that I have with the way those scenes played out.
Hey man, you've only been here for 1 BBY. I've been here for 2 BBY.
Yeah.
Show some respect.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to that point, he stayed in danger, he stayed in the Senate until then.
Yeah.
But it was just weird. The
dynamic.
The choices there were weird and the dynamic was weird. Yeah, I wish they had built more of a connection when he goes to Cassian. When, like, if Mothma, I don't want to do any rewriting or anything, but just, like, that he didn't have more of a connection with Cassian when he went to say, like, I want to go down swinging. It just kind of irked me because Jimmy Smits plays the character, I think, much more softly. Not to say he's not a strong character. He's a strong character, but he's just more gentle of a vibe I think he brings. And so it's a little bit harder to see Benjamin Bratt. He's gruff and he's like strong and chiseled and whatever. Maybe that played into it, but definitely not the character I expected to see there.
Yeah. Dude, I'll rewrite it a little bit for fun. You got Bail, right? And Leia. And he gets a message to Leia that says, show up at Scarif and get the battle plans or whatever and go find Obi-Wan. They don't get a reunion. Could you imagine if Bail had said something to Andor to the effect of like, I do it all for my daughter so we can, have a brighter future together, one day on our home planet of Alderaan,
Yeah.
And then you parse that out with Bix and the baby. That could have been interesting, for an extra little layer of heartbreak.
That's true. I like if he had said on our home planet of Alderaan, you would have been like, I hate it when they write that into. I hate it when your father Han Solo. So it would have been funny to hear you gripe about that as well. But yeah, I don't know. Like, just not. I think the thing here is he's just not the character that we were both. Maybe our expectations got in the way of this. And like we've seen a lot of him and this was just very different. And just to me, this read stranger than the flashback episode this late in the show, just because there's still infighting between the rebels. And like you said, we still see it in Rogue One. It's never going to be a perfect system. Everyone's not always going to get along. But it's hard to watch. It was just hard to watch the level of control that they think they need to have. Like last arc, Cassian said, the minute that I have to ask permission to come and go, I'm gone. And now they're like controlling everything. And he's in trouble for taking the ship. I get that it has to be regimented. I get that they're fighting a war. It has to be a military, but it personally rubs me the wrong way, the way it's all set up.
This is, again, though, we're going to sound like a broken record, or at least I'm going to sound like a broken record. This is what the show does well in making the audience feel stuff while watching. And it's often uncomfortable or frustrating, they're very visceral emotions. So that must have been the intent there with those senators. But yeah, just like we were texting, like they're insufferable. I wouldn't want to work with them either. I would have the same reaction as Andor, like, I'm out of here, I'm checking out. He's having such a hard time staying in the fight, but then, to have to come to terms with that with such resistance there amongst your own people, I totally get it. But that was written, I think, to make us feel like this. It would have been lame otherwise if they were like, okay, great, now we know exactly what to do next, roll credits into Rogue One. There's always hardship conflict through this. Yeah, it's never easy.
Yeah, I think the uncomfortable aspect, like we've talked before, I'll tell you an uncomfortable scene, a scene that started uncomfortable and turned into something else for me. Something I really, really wanted to see, something I had high expectations on, hearing more of Nemik's manifesto at some point at the end. And we do get that. And as it starts to play, we start on the rebels. I can't remember if we're on Cassian or not, but we start with a different group of people in it, and it's playing the same like clip of it. And I'm like, we've done this already. I thought that maybe they would have written more. But then we see that it's Partagaz listening to it. And that was just so... I got whiplash from it. I got whiplash from thinking, this is a little bit lame, to being like, oh, this is dope. Like, this is awesome. Like, he's listening to it, and then like the idea is, I guess, that it has been disseminated throughout the galaxy. Like,
went viral.
It's out there and active. Something that we didn't get to see because there wasn't enough show is that like Cassian distributed this to the rebellion or to someone, or just distributed it out, broadcasts it, and it's everywhere. And that Partagaz is listening to it, and you've been able to see the cracks in his demeanor this whole arc. You can see it on his face that maybe it's a little bit of like, wait, like tyranny, control, all the stuff that Nemik's saying, you can see him like start to question, and it's because he's in the situation that he's in. But I just thought that was such a great scene, and we got to hear the manifesto again, and that it's being distributed out in the galaxy.
Yeah, I think you're right. It would have been a disservice to not reference it again somehow. I like the idea of like Andor reading it and becoming a rebel, like I've been doing so much reading in my own life. It's like, that's the idea of like, I'm absorbing these concepts and like radicalizing myself or whatever, It's great that they gave it some kind of plot line within the show. I don't know how everyone is reading it, but I read it as like, he heard it and he says, my act of, one act of insurrection against the Empire is like, I'm going to off myself in my office here. That was his own little rebellion, however small, could still maybe like do Nemik proud.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. I think that that was his small act of rebellion because he knew they were coming for him. And he knows that they are not a cohesive group brought together. They are every man out for themselves. Krennic says, I can't protect you, Leo, because he knows that this leak, that Dedra's leak, is traced back to the like higher her commanding officer, who is Partagaz. He knows that he's going to be at fault for this. It is Krennic's fault. The Empire mail system failed, so Dedra got these like forms and books and stuff, and the Death Star wasn't ready. So it's entirely Krennic's fault, but Krennic's not going to admit that, and Partagaz knows that. So it is his own act of rebellion to like take himself out before the Empire can take him out. Just a great way to bring back the manifesto to Imperial ears, not inspiring a rebel anywhere out in the world. Or maybe to your point, it is inspiring a rebel, but Imperial ears. Yeah.
Even if it didn't inspire him, if it was just like, crap, man, they got us.
Screwed.
Yeah. Like that's also still satisfying. I really like Partagaz. I was going to say it's a bummer, like we won't see more of his character, but like this, I kind of like the Imperials, like seeing inside of the Imperials. I know like everyone's like, oh, Dedra's so bad. Oh no, Dedra. But like, it's so interesting to get to know them and humanize with them, like humanize with Partagaz, like right before he offs himself, you know, or humanize with Dedra when she's in prison and she's like, crap, I was so loyal to the system and it got me nowhere, you know, and you're like, she got what she deserved. Totally. But you still feel bad for it, you know, or I do. Other people don't, but I do.
Yeah, I think we just have a connection to human being, or we should maybe just have a connection to human beings in the first place. I will say that another level of satisfaction for me was seeing Dedra in prison. Not only was she a super competent part of the Imperial machine, but she pushed boundaries. She went beyond the boundaries. What she got in trouble for here wasn't entirely her fault. Some of it definitely was, but again, like, someone delivered her the wrong mail. Like, the Empire is full of buffoons after all. It's not Dedra's fault, but a lot of it was. But seeing her in that space after being such a competent part of the machine that then betrayed her, I think is satisfying in a lot of ways. It's satisfying for me because she was a bad guy, satisfying because the Empire doesn't work and it cracks and bleeds and it doesn't care about its people, and that's why it fails. And I think that was just a great way to do that. Whereas on the other hand, obviously we're talking about maybe some infighting still with the rebels, but they are coming together for the greater good and freedom. Luthen's like, I want freedom. And Dedra's like, you don't want freedom, you want chaos. Everything she's doing is chaotic. She's an agent of chaos in these 3 episodes. And it turns out that the Empire is actually against that because she gets imprisoned.
She cannot calibrate her enthusiasm is her problem. I also love that Kleya wakes up. Or no, Dedra goes to sleep in the prison. The lights go out. And then Kleya wakes up on Yavin, like perfect, cut back to back. And I also really liked Krennic being like, you missed your calling as a rebel spy. Because like, if you imagine if Dedra, like if Cyril had turned Dedra, after the Gorman stuff and been like, what are we doing here? Like, we should be helping these people, and somehow turned her into an asset for the rebels. Like, there'd be a whole alternate history there. So just like a nice little like jab there. Like, who knows what Dedra thought about that, if she was still, I guess she was still loyal after that conversation. She was like, we should, here's what we should do next. Maybe she'll have time to think about that in prison, whether or not she chose the right path or not.
I love that he shuts her down in that moment. He's like, we'll try to get by without you.
Yeah, that's
expertise.
So good.
Like, she's trying to like tell him what to do. I do think like Krennic is not a competent Imperial. I think like he's the reason a lot of stuff goes wrong for a lot of people. So it's very funny to see him as like the highest in the chain of command here.
Well, so what about the actual finale, the actual ending? We're doing the montage. We're seeing all the characters. Everyone's high-fiving. No, they're not high-fiving, but we're seeing the they're running through the jungle. Everyone's giving the, hey, what's up? Yeah. And a spaceship flies off. We get triumphant music. We get a little beat. We get a little pause. And we see Mina-Rau and all the wheat fields and B2 emo. And you're like, oh, what's going to happen here? And then we see Bix.
I'm getting goosebumps.
And Bix with her baby. And we get almost like, they did a couple silent clock episodes. This wasn't a silent clock, but they're kind of walking up with the melody and they're like, da, da, da. They leave off on like a little bit of a leading tone. And then we cut to black and we're like, blah. Ends on a minor chord after that. Doesn't end on a happy note. But yeah, what did you think of Bix and the baby?
Yeah, I think it can't end on a happy note because we know where it goes next. I was again in tears as the show was ending, as Melchi's running through the woods, as we're building up, as Cassian's walking up to the ship, as we're cutting to Saw, as it's ending, as Kleya is seeing the sunrise that Luthen, I'm getting choked up right now. As Kleya is seeing the sunrise that Luthen never gets to see, we cut and we see B2 Emo, who I've been worried about this whole time. And as soon as we start to pan away from B2 Emo, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I didn't realize that this is where Bix would have went. And then we see Bix walking through the field, and I was like, what is she carrying? And I turned into the rock, the gif of the rock from Jumanji, where he's like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And then we see the baby. I loved that so much. This was, for me, the perfect ending to this show. We're leading into Rogue One, and the whole thing about this entire show was that I did not know how it was going to make me feel because we knew where the characters end up, forgetting entirely that Star Wars is all about hope, and specifically like hope of the next generation. There was no prediction in my mind. Maybe I'm an idiot, but I didn't even go to the place where like Bix and Cassian would have a kid and we would see that. So it took me by surprise, and I really, really loved it. I loved that we see Luthen fought for the next generation. He made that clear. We get to see his entire speech from season 1 play out in this arc, again, to the point of Kleya seeing this. He was fighting for her, and he was fighting for the next generation the whole time. They get to see the sunrise that he doesn't get to see. And then we see Cassian's baby, who gets to be the hope of the next generation after Cassian sacrifices himself for the galaxy, for that kid, for Bix, for everyone. What an incredible way to end the show. I really, really loved that.
So
how did you feel about it?
Yeah, man. Different than you. Like, would you
different?
Would you say that got you like amped up though? Like you said, like that was a great way to end it, but like you're pumped for that ending? Like, yes, this baby can live on. Because this is the way I read it. I mean, that's rhetorical. You don't have to answer that, I guess. I read it like as Andor's going off on the mission, the spaceship is flying, we get like the big symphony orchestra. I'm like, all right, it's starting to feel like Star Wars in here. And yeah, and then we get one extra scene, and it's like, oh, I was so deflated by it. We know that everyone is making sacrifices in this show for the greater good, for the galaxy. And you just had to like drop that. Like, he's got a kid out there and he's watering his plants before he's leaving. And he's like, maybe when all this settles down, how stoked would he be to be like, whoa, I have a kid? You know, that's just so heartbreaking. It was like, it's such a quick flip. They could have wiped into the end credits like every other Star Wars and swelled up the, you know, and we could have marched off into the credits. And instead, we get this moment that brings you back down to earth. That's, here's the real cost of this war, of the rebellion. And that did not get me stoked. I was like, I hung my head. I'm like, this is so depressing. Like, I don't want to call Andor a depressing show, because it's a great show. The show is great. The writing is great. The dialogue's great. When there is action, it's excellent. It's an excellent show. But I was like, this is too much. This is too much.
Oh my goodness. That is different. That is different than how I feel. Yeah, I think that we're looking at this from two different ways, as we often do, which is what makes Krypton Alderaan such a great show. I was definitely not looking at it from an audience perspective, maybe is the best way to describe it, where there's so many things here that I want to touch on that you said. Like, I personally did not need to be amped up at the end. I didn't need to be like, yeah, let's go get him, because I know that this story is leading into the next one, and that's story leads into the next one where we get them. This almost ends the opposite of Rogue One, now that you're making me think about it, where I'm going to take that back. I think that this ends exactly like Rogue One, but instead of Leia or a character coming out and saying hope, we see the kid. This ends exactly like Rogue One ends, and that's the point of this show. And I think going back to discomfort, even at the end, even in traditional series format, we think we're building up to something grand. Tony Gilroy and the writers and directors did that, but then took it back.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more uncomfortable than that. And I think that it is a happy ending. I think that it is showing us a little bit of like, hey, we won a little, like I've been saying we were going to get throughout the series, but it's extremely uncomfortable. And it's even more sad because we know that Cassian's not coming home. He sacrificed himself so that they could live that life. And I think that's what we're supposed to, and it is sad, but it's supposed to be sad. I wanted him to ride off into the sunset. I would have been fine with them retconning Rogue One. Give Cassian a way out. And they didn't, but they didn't do that. So I'm pretty happy with the way this ended. And I think it's in line with the way the rest of the show went. Yep. This part might not be completely satisfying for everyone because it's not the way things are supposed to end, but it's not ending. Like you said, Rogue One is the end. That doesn't have a happy ending either.
Right.
For the characters that we know and love. It has a happy ending for the next group of people. And then at the end of their story, it doesn't have a happy ending for them, and so on and so forth, because that's how the world works, or whatever that Bo Burnham song is. I just really loved it. And actually, you're talking me into loving it even more because you've talked me into it fitting in with the format of the show and, in fact, Rogue One.
I talked you into talking me into liking it. Because you're right. That fits the style guide that, like, we just can't have nice things here. And the hope that scene portrays is beautiful, but to me, the depression is a little bit more of a powerful emotion that outweighs it in that moment, you know? But it's grounding and it's effective in the way that they've portrayed it, and still satisfying in the way that it goes into Rogue One. And you know that Bix is there with the child and they can live on happily ever after in your headcanon. Or maybe I've heard people theorizing about what character that child can grow up to be. Who knows?
Broom Boy. We're all a little bit, I don't mean that he's actually Broom Boy. Let me get out in front of that. I just mean that we're all a little bit Broom Boy. The point of Star Wars is hope of the next generation.
Yeah, totally. And that's where we leave off. So man, I need to collect myself again. I feel deflated all over again. But next week, we'll be back to talk about Rogue One, and we'll kind of do one more kind of season 2. What do you want to call it for next week?
A look back.
Look back on season 2. Yeah. All right. So listeners, we'd love to keep this conversation going. Drop your comments down below. What did you think about the finale? Did you go right into Rogue One? And make sure to subscribe and tune in next time for more nerdy pop culture, but mostly Star Wars. Thanks for watching the podcast today. I've been Royce.
I've been Cassian and Bix's little baby.
And we've been Krypton to Alderaan.
Mina-Rau. Harvest some wheat.
Krypton to Alderaan. Krypton to Alderaan.
Hey, do you think Vel knew